In the spiritual life, it's recommended to find moments for silence. That in the silence that we have, God speaks to our hearts and in our souls. For example, as we drive from point A to point B, we could turn off the radio. And in that silence, we could talk to God, we could process different things, we can listen for God to speak in that silence. At Mass, we have opportunities for silence, a few moments here and there for us to be still and to notice the voice of God. At Eucharistic adoration, a time for silence as we sit in the presence of Jesus in the Holy Eucharist. Silence is valuable for the spiritual life. It's necessary. But there are times, though, that maybe silence isn't the right answer. That, like the prophet Isaiah, who says today, "For Jerusalem's sake, I will not be silent. For Zion's sake, I will not be quiet." That there are moments where this tension of silence, that we have to speak up, that we have to say something, that silence cannot take place. The prophet Isaiah, as he says, "For Jerusalem's sake, I will not be silent. For Zion's sake, I will not be quiet." Well, the prophet hears God's voice and is to be that mouthpiece for God. The prophet can't be silent when God gives the message to be spoken. In psychology, there is something called the bystander effect. Essentially, it says, for example, if downtown there was a car accident and there were about 12 people that witnessed it on the sidewalk and whatnot, that each of those 12, that many of them will think the other person, someone else, will call 911. And maybe because of this bystander effect, silence ensues and no one calls 911 and help isn't summoned. There's a need, there's a time, a moment for a person to rise up and to speak. In our gospel today, it's Mary at the wedding feast at Cana. Mary wasn't silent. She noticed what was happening. She saw that the wine was running low. And so she went to Jesus and she made him aware. They have no wine. And because she was not silent, because she spoke up for this wedding couple, I will not be silent. For these guests, I will not be quiet. Because Mary spoke up, Jesus performs the first of his public miracles. We are all called at some point to be like Isaiah, to be like Mary, to speak up. For example, in the face of injustice, that when we see that something wrong is taking place and we know that something better could happen or is the right answer, well, we become the voice of reason that speaks up against this injustice. I think about the pro-life movement and the anniversary of Roe versus Wade and how people gather to speak up for the voiceless, to speak up for the cause of life. There are any number of social justice issues that people notice and they speak up on behalf of. To speak up on behalf of the homeless or some other topic or need. Another instance where we could rise up and speak and not be silent is when we're with our friends, 4 or 5 people in a group, and we're all gossiping and talking negatively about someone. Well, maybe we're to rise up and we're to say, this person, I don't know if we should be talking about them like that. Or have you ever thought about this, that we come to that person's defense in the midst of gossip and ill talk? I experienced this once. I was in a group. Another priest actually was there as well, and speaking about this one person, and this priest, he spoke up by his action. He walked away from the conversation. I'll tell you, that's lived in my mind for years. He didn't say anything, but his actions spoke louder than those words. He was not silent at that moment. We are believers. We belong to the Catholic Church. Catholic Church maligned by so many people. The sex abuse scandals and all of these things that have taken place in the church. People will malign the church and its ministers and what we believe. Maybe we're not to be silent when we hear these things, but we're to rise up and to defend the church and to share our experience and to show them maybe the error of their thought or their ways. You know, at the end of the gospel today, at the wedding feast at Cana, it says that the disciples, they began to believe in Jesus because of the miracle at Cana. And I would think that these disciples who witnessed the miracle, that they're going to tell someone. They're not going to be silent about what has just taken place. That the waiters who witnessed the water turn into wine, that they're going to be telling everybody, that the guests will as well. That, as the psalm says, proclaim to all the nations God's marvelous deeds, that's going to happen. And so we're not to be silent. We're to share what God has done in our life. We're to share the reason for our hope. We're to share the faith and evangelize others. Our second reading today says that the Holy Spirit gives certain gifts. What I know about the Holy Spirit is that the Holy Spirit inspires in us words and actions. That the Holy Spirit gives us the words that we're supposed to say at a difficult moment, in a difficult situation. Maybe what we need to do is to find a few moments for silence. Allow the Holy Spirit to speak and listen to the Holy Spirit. And then to speak up with those inspired words. Because we can no longer be silent. We can no longer be quiet.